The chair will allow that.
Thank you, sir.
Please proceed.
Thank you. My name is Tony Hwang, State Senator for the 28th District. I want to thank the esteemed chair, Senator Farah, Representative Berger, and the ranking members, Representative Davis and Senator France. I am here to speak in support of Senate Bill 163, Learn Here, Live Here. It is a bill that I have been active and supported since 2008. And I want to take a moment to thank the past chairs and the current chairs of the Commerce Committee, Representative Berger, Senator LeBeau, Senator France, and Representative Camillo for their great work on this bill. Simply put, this is an opportunity for us to alleviate the brain drain in our state. And I think I am also conscious that we are in a very difficult budgetary session in which we are looking to enact this act that would potentially drain some money from our budgetary needs. But I do believe it's an appropriate trade-off. And I have here with me a Trinity College junior who's serving as an intern in this General Assembly, who would offer a real context. And I will give up the remainder of my time for Jacob Cahill from Trinity College, class of 2017.
Chairman Fanfara, Berger, ranking members France and Davis, members of the Finance Committee. My name is Jake Cahill, and I am testifying on support of SB 163, an act requiring the establishment of the Learn Here, Live Here plan. I am a political science major, junior at Trinity College. I have spent the last 7 years in this state for my education, 4 years at Westminster School in Simsbury, Connecticut, and now I am in my third year at Trinity. I've developed definitely a love for the state in the 7 years that I have spent here. And from what I understand and from what I have studied, in 1992, Connecticut only retained 48% of its in-state freshmen, a net loss of over 4,600 students. You flash forward to 2014, that number hasn't changed. In 2014, we lost 52% leave the state for college. I think what students my age want to see is an incentive to stay, influence their community, and build something. And I think what the Learn Here, Live Here plan will do is give students at the very least something to think about and see that opportunity. As a college student, I can tell you, especially as a junior, as someone who's starting to think about that life after college, you think of it as a somewhat uncertain time. And I think what this bill will do is will alleviate that uncertainty that a lot of college students feel, and it will give that incentive to stay that I think the state is looking for. So thank you. I thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony, Senator. Thank you. Any comments or questions? Senator France, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to both of you. Thank you for coming and testifying. Senator, we get to see you all the time, so I'm not going to ask you any questions. But J.K., was it? J.K.
Jake Cahill.
Cahill.
Cahill, yeah.
Cahill. Got it, Jay. So, Jay, thank you for coming to testify. It's not an easy thing to do. It's rare that we get someone from college or even a few years after college to come and testify in front of the awe-inspiring Finance Committee. So thank you for that. Would you say that this is a clear incentive, and that if this were to be passed into law, that this is something that would go over really well amongst your colleagues at Trinity?
I mean, in my preparation to testify, I definitely went around to a lot of my peers, and I asked them about the bill, and I can tell you it piqued a lot of their interest. And and like I said, I think it's something to at least consider, and it is a very tempting option, I believe. And I think everybody, pretty much everyone who I go to school with, I asked them about the bill, and all of them, I think, just unanimously said that's a great idea. That's great legislation. So I think almost universally, I've rarely seen anyone with anything negative to say about it.
And a follow-up question to that, how many people are from out-of-state ballpark at Trinity? And how big is the student population?
I know our student population is about, I believe it's in about the 2,400 range. As for the out-of-state numbers, I'm not sure. I do not have that at the moment, unfortunately. Okay. I'm sorry.
And if, say it's 25 or 30%, something like that, do you think that of those 25 or 30% of the student body who came to Connecticut from out of state, do you think this would be as attractive to them as someone who actually grew up here and already has that kind of commitment under their belt. It may be subliminal, it may not be an overt, I need to stay in Connecticut, but those are your roots. So you want to stay here? Do you think it would affect them in a positive way as well?
Yeah, and I mean, like as I said before, I have a lot of my friends and peers at school are also people who, like me, like I was born in New Jersey, moved to Massachusetts, and I schooled in Connecticut, is one way to put it. And I, like many of my other out-of-state peers, find this bill as something very, very tempting and intriguing to consider. And I think it's had that same, like I said, has that same reaction for whether they're in-state or out-of-state.
Terrific. Thank you, Jay. And after you buy your first house here in Connecticut, we look forward to welcoming you to the House of Representatives right here.
Thank you very much.
Senate Chair of the Finance Committee, Senator Fonfara.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, both for your testimony here today. And either one of you can, or both can, answer this question if you so desire. You're asking for the legislature to step in, government to act in this regard to provide assistance. Students have the choice, don't they, in terms of where they decide they want to go to school? They can go to a high-cost school, they can go to a moderately priced school, they can go to a lower-cost school, in which their debt at the end of that would be different depending on where. Why not let the market decide this issue as opposed to government intervening?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And that's a very good and important question. I think we've addressed it. Obviously, Jake represents Trinity, which is a fantastic private university, but this bill covers all academic institutions. We're looking at vocational technical schools. We're looking at nursing schools. It is an opportunity to create an avenue for one of our great competitive advantages in the state, which is education, and to be able to have those people come in and stay in our state and contribute to get back. You talk about market forces, but unfortunately, the cost of living and being able to buy a home and set down their roots are becoming tougher and tougher. So one of the incentives is in using income tax that they would be paying to the state, that they would be gaining from working and building up a compounding capital investment. We are saying to them, invest in our state. Invest in our state by building roots and being a contributing member. Because when you look at that population that we are now losing by statistical evidence from what was offered, that we have an opportunity to keep the very, very high asset value of contributing employed talent in our state. That is the market force at work in saying we need to create an environment to allow these people to stay. Because when they stay, the rest of the market forces come into play to create productive, revenue-generating members into our community. Right now, statistically, we are losing that population. And the unfortunate aspect of that is once we lose good young people like Jake and others, they never come back. And we have seen that in our decreasing revenue estimates every single year. We don't have an opportunity to build a bench for younger people, for different pools of contributing income-generating, tax revenue-generating people in our state. They're leaving. So to answer your question, when you talk about market forces, we have to have a state create a legislative environment. I believe it is a small investment to allow our fine young people and anyone who believes in the great value that this state provides in education to stay here and contribute to it. Why are we a training ground for the rest of the country? Let's keep them in the state. Let's keep them as revenue-generating people so that they can sustain our economy and our towns.
I guess my concern is that to the extent that we subsidize further the cost of higher education, which this would, it does not provide downward pressure on an area that is the cost of education and is exceeding the cost of living in general. So why would we want to continue to encourage that growth, that exponential growth, further by subsidizing it in any way?
Well, I think when you calculate the
Why wouldn't we want the market where students can make decisions about where they go to school based on the cost of that education, which would then serve to provide downward pressure, I would think, on schools that want to remain competitive, that they would have to get their fiscal house in order to a greater degree than they are currently?
Well, I think we may be talking about two separate things. I think the focus to have educational institutions have greater accountability of their expenditures and transparency is something that I greatly respect. But I do believe that in an open market force, as we have just gone through our academic, college admissions criteria in the last couple of weeks, is that Connecticut, through one of its greatest treasures, is the high educational institutions that we have. We're able to attract people like Jake, who live in Massachusetts and attended school in Trinity. Let's keep that talent pool. One of the talents that we've done. But again, you're talking about tuition and academic institutions. I don't believe we're subsidizing educational institutions. I think we're subsidizing people to set down roots in our community after they leave school, after they get their education. I want to keep them in our state, to be employed in our state, to be taxpayers, to be property taxpayers in our towns, because if they leave, we have lost them.
Senator, if you believe that educational institutions aren't mindful of the capacity to pay, there is a limit to what students and families will be able to pay. I'm surprised we haven't met that yet, but apparently we haven't, since schools continue to raise their costs beyond the average cost of living. And the fact that we would be providing another subsidy creates more headroom for those institutions to continue to increase their costs. I don't know if that's wise public policy on our side.
It's a public policy, and I understand the chairman's thought process on this, but I would offer a context as an individual, that as an immigrant and as a household that struggle economically, there is nothing more important than to get the highest, best possible education that you can get. So I understand that we have a current...
Do you think the current cost structure is encouraging that belief and that philosophy? Do you think the way the cost of higher education today is accessible to most people?
In some contexts, without financial aid, absolutely not. However, respectfully, I do believe that when you talk about market forces, the opportunity for an individual to attain the highest, best possible education, I believe has no price tag. And I believe the marketplace places on that. We have great institutions across the board, across this country. They do charge a wide range of dollars and tuition dollars. But I will share with you, as we have had just admissions through, as I said, a couple of weeks ago, the opportunity for a family that can and for a student that can has no price limit when you look at an education that can be attained. So yes, do I believe that educational cost is not sensitive to the marketplace? Absolutely. But with all due respect, the fact of the matter is there is an ever-increasing application number to some of our top universities in excess of $50,000, $60,000. And if there is a real economic analysis of it, they wouldn't have that continual increase in application. My reality is, if I have an opportunity, and myself as a parent, if my child has an opportunity to get the best possible education that he or she can get, yes, in some ways, I'm not going to be sticker shock. I want to do my best as a parent and as a provider to give my children the best education that's possible. Because, in my mind, And my hope is in education as a priority that if we give that to a child, their potentials are unlimited. So as I talk about that, that's why I believe so strongly in Learn Here, Live Here, because the segue to that is we do a great job of that in our state. We do a great job of educating from UConn to our UConn affiliates to the community colleges to the Yales and the Trinities of the world. With all due respect, we produce great, talented people. I want to keep them in the state. I want to keep them in the state because if they're willing to make that investment, I want them to make that investment into the future for their families and their children in the state of Connecticut, rather than Texas, Florida, California. That is why I believe so strongly in Learn Here, Live Here, because I do believe with a little help, focusing on what we're talking about, enriching people's lives through education, from the technical schools on up. If we can do that, let's keep that talent pool in this state. Let's not do that for the rest of the world.
I don't think there's a person who's a parent on this side or a would-be parent would disagree with what you say, but in sitting here, we're lawmakers, as you are, not parents, and I don't know if we should be continuing to give license to the higher educational community to continue to increase their costs because we subsidize so much of it. Thereby, they know that there's more opportunity to increase those costs and just continue the dog chasing the tail approach that I see happening. And so that's my concerns that I have with respect to this legislation.
The chairman's concerns are duly noted because I do believe our escalating
Thank you, Mr.
costs,
Chairman.
the escalating cost of schools and affordability is something we should explore. And I believe our Higher Education Committee deals with that often. But I do believe that Learn Here, Live Here is not to subsidize those higher educational institutions. It is to allow these individuals that have used and chosen to come to Connecticut to get their educational training, that they stay in this state in their vocation, that as they become tax-paying contributors in our state, that we allow them an opportunity to set down some roots. Because once you buy something or use that to set down roots, you work harder to stay in the state. And I want to keep as many people in our state as possible and not be known as a national leader for out-migration of our young people.
Thank
So-
you. Thank you, Senator. Any other questions from the committee members? Representative Srinivasan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Hwang, for coming in front of this committee and for all the work you have done on this bill. We appreciate that very much. And Jay, we want to thank you, as Senator Franz said, for coming out here and testifying in front of the committee.
Thank you.
Just a couple of questions. In the work that you have looked into on the subject matter, are you aware of any of our neighboring states having a similar program?
Not that I know of. Sorry.
Not that you know of, in as much as you have looked into it and not found any, or you have not had an opportunity to look into the neighboring states?
I have not had the opportunity, no. My research was solely focused on Connecticut, yes.
Thank you. And my other question is that as I look at this piece of legislation and giving a tax credit when you are a first home buyer, as you graduate, and walk me through this, when you graduated of college and we want to retain you in Connecticut and make sure that we don't lose you, your colleagues, and other people in the state of Connecticut, it takes, you're not, the first thing you're doing when you graduate is not going buy a house. So obviously that's a process between your being ready, is this where you're going to live, is this where, depending on your personal circumstances, so on and so forth, is where you're finally going to settle to some extent. And then comes the decision making about buying a house, after you've decided that you've lived here. So my concern is, and maybe you can address this, is that this does not, this bill does not address an important issue of the first few years after graduating, which to me are the more vital years, because you are then looking at, obviously, at that point in time, more than likely living in an apartment, so on and so forth, where this would not qualify. And if we don't retain you the first 3 or 4 years, the chances of your coming back to the state because of this program, do you think it would be likely?
Well, I think, as Tony said, the idea behind this bill is the incentive to set down roots. And in order for, I think, someone like me or my other peers to set down roots, they'd have to see an environment that is suited for such a thing. And I do state in my testimony that this bill is one piece of putting together that environment. And also, in addition, the bill is also putting in that payment over the 10 years. And it is one of those things where I think you look into when someone is looking at a potential long-term future in Connecticut, it is something for them definitely to consider in addition to looking for a job in that respect.
And Representative Srinivas, and I would also add, I think you addressed a very critical point, the initial first 2 or 3 years. What is, and they are the deciding points of that. What you have in this plan, Learn Your Live Here, is a buy-in in some ways for an individual like Jake to work 2 or 3 years, to have that money that they would have paid into income tax, building up equity in some ways as an incentive to say, look, I'm actually making some investments toward my future. So it is another factor, maybe small, but it is another factor to encourage our talented educational enriched pool of people to stay in our state. Just a little small factor, because it is critical. You know, if you have some additional dollars that's socked away that you can use to the future, it may be another factor in your cost calculation of whether you take a job outside of this state or not.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Jay. And hopefully after you graduate, you'll decide to stay back in Connecticut. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Davis, did you have your hand up, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Please proceed.
I did, and there was a lot discussed that pretty much covered my questions for the two of you, but I do just want to thank you, Senator Hwang, especially for your advocacy for this. I know it's been something that you've been very passionate about for many years, as have I, and I look forward to hopefully working with you. And Jake, just a quick question. Do you currently live on campus in Trinity, or do you live off campus, or
I live on campus.
in the city of Hartford? And given an incentive like this, would it be something that you would consider buying a house in one of our cities here in Connecticut, whether it be Hartford or New Haven or Bridgeport, something?
I mean, like I said, it's definitely a very intriguing incentive, and I think it is definitely something I would consider coming out of college. Yes.
And I think that's important to know, because it's very important that we try to build up our cities here in the state of Connecticut. And one way we can do this is by incentivizing our young people who go to school in our cities, and whether it be Hartford, New Haven, or Bridgeport, to stay there in that city and help try to build that community and make it an even better place. So I thank you both for coming here and testifying in favor of this bill here today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Baumgarten.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, Senator Hwang and Jake, thanks for coming out. I got a couple questions just to follow up with some of the questions that were posed by Representative Srinivasan and yourself. Now, at the beginning of this, at the end of your testimony, when you were answering your first questions, we talked about whether or not since the state, to an extent, or the federal government subsidizes a lot of educational expenditures for higher education, and Representative Srinivasan brought up a point about whether or not, once you're finished with college and you have an incredible amount of debt to your name, whether or not one would have the capacity to buy their own home. Now, in the state, we also have a real estate conveyance tax, which doesn't make up a large percentage of the budget. But to Representative Davis's point, if you live in a place like Hartford or, say, New London, Bridgeport, New Haven, the municipality is also attaching a 0.25% tax on top of that. So that's roughly a 1% tax on the total amount of your house. So say if you're buying a house for $1,500 dollars, I'm sorry, $150,000, you're going to be paying a tax of $1,500. So, we can talk about market forces and whether or not, colleges, or people can, right out of college, can afford houses. But would you say right now the state is doing anything to keep young people here, considering we're sort of taxing an arbitrary, transaction, if you may?
Thank you, Representative Gardner. I think, as Jake said earlier, it is part of the solution. I think we have a myriad of complexities in our state that are challenging, and we all know that. But I also am a huge believer that there's tremendous greatness in our state that keeps people here. And this is why I've advocated so much on this bill, because it's just a small part, but it sends a tremendous message to our residents that have obtained education here, which is one of the big lures of our state. But as I say that, it is also talking about setting down roots. The challenges you talk about, there are people that would want to live in those communities because of the appeal, the character, and the quality of life that it offers. That being said, what this bill would offer as a solution is, if people need to recollect that and understand, one of the hardest things in making real estate purchases is that initial down payment of cash. And most gainfully employed young people do not have that cash reserve unless you have supportive people, family, or extended members that offer that kind of cash outlay. This would be a solution. And I think that's one of the big nuances where the Connecticut Realtors have supported this, because they understand the hardest challenge in making real estate purchases is not the ongoing monthly payments. If you've got a good education and you've got a good trade, you're going to make that revenue paying forward on a mortgage. But the challenge is, what do you have as cash to make that down payment for that purchase? That is one of the big appeals to this, is that in this Learn Here, Live Here, you're able to have a reserve of money that you can use toward a down payment. And that is something that I don't think we've talked a lot about. It's critical. You've asked a lot of young people who are going to make their first apartment purchase or home purchase. You don't have that cash outlay to make that cash down payment to that purchase. That is where Learn Here, Live Here is incredibly helpful.
Terrific. Well, thank you for providing your testimony, and thanks again.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Mashinsky, please proceed.
Thank you. Senator Hwang, I just wanted to talk for a minute about the your claim that we're losing students, graduates. Because Program Review and Investigation did look at this when we did our alignment study of workforce and education in 2009. We statistically, we questioned that claim. We did find that 41% of the students attend in-state, and when they go out of state, it's because they're going to independent colleges. When they remain in-state, and that's been increasing, it's for a state school education. It's more affordable for them, and that's what they choose. But we found an in-migration of bachelor's degrees, 29,877 per year, versus an out-migration, 26,904. So there was a net in-migration of bachelor's degrees. And what we found was the real problem was there was a misalignment between education and jobs, so that, we're turning out people in Connecticut who are not going to get a job here because there are more graduates being churned out than there are slots in that field. For example, we turn out more lawyers than we have slots for lawyers. And they may be really good lawyers, but there are just so many slots in Connecticut to absorb lawyers. And so some of them will have to leave the state if they really want to practice law. So the thing we really have to pay attention to is aligning what their specialty is and what the job openings are. And our big problem in Connecticut is dealing with the changes in employment and making the education system match up with how these changes are happening. So when you talk to the business community, they'll tell you they're having difficulty finding people to hire in certain fields. And qualified people, they're not being able to find them. And we're also finding some of the new fields, we don't have academic programs that are training people for some of the new fields, the technology fields, clean energy, and so on. So it's, I would first say that I don't think your statement that we're losing people with degrees is accurate. There's more coming in than leaving. I do feel there is a problem with people getting out of college and being able to survive here. I agree with you on that. I'm not sure if this bill will fix it. I suspect the bigger problem is making sure that people who come with degrees or come out of school with degrees have an opening to go into so they can plan their deposit and plan their home. And then the other thing is probably make it more affordable for them to have a home here. The homes here are very expensive. You can get a much bigger, fancier home down south on a bigger piece of land for the same amount of money. And so we have to do what we can to make housing fit the incomes of people that graduate from here. But anyway, just ideas for thought. I know your bill is well intentioned and you're trying to help college graduates. I'm not sure it fixes the problem, but probably should ask the Trinity graduate if what his field is and if he has a job in his field lined up.
Oh, as a as a junior, I do not yet have a job lined up right out of college. But right away, just to address your statement that this bill will not solve the problem, I think we addressed that before. It is not meant to be a be-all, end-all silver bullet to solve the problem. It is an attempt to alleviate those problems, and it is a step towards making this a more suitable environment or more lucrative environment for those people like me coming out of college. And it is certainly, despite the fact that I, at the moment, do not have that job lined up yet, legislation like this has already piqued my interest in potentially remaining in Connecticut. So I can say already, and just with me and among my peers, this is something that I think has the potential to be very successful.
Okay, so it's like a good faith invitation by the state if we pass this, basically.
Representative Machinsky, between Baumgartner and Machinsky, I'm tongue twisted here, but I want to address. I think your point again on the alignment is right on point, but I think it's a higher education perspective, and I understand that. But in regards to the statistical question you raised, what we're looking at, my statement of out-migration, are college graduates, not people coming into this state for education. And as I said earlier, it is actually indeed one of our state's incredible draws that we're able to bring people from Massachusetts, from throughout the country, to come to our state institutions of learning. So I think the PRI analysis is on an educational institution in migration. This bill addresses what happens to all the very talented people that we draw into our state that have obtained an education. And I think you bring up some very, very valid points in regards to that number is unquestioned. We have an out-migration of graduates. Maybe it's due to alignment of course offerings, and I think our schools have adapted in creating some new technology and new majors to attract that. But you also raise about the high cost of living, the high cost of housing. This bill is a focus on addressing that issue to allow our people that have studied to stay in this state by having a little bit of an incentive to make a down payment, to be able to buy into the housing market, to set down their roots. We are talking about the same thing. You and I both want to keep all of our talented people that come to this state, that in migration of young people and other people that choose to come to our vocational schools, community colleges, state schools, private schools, law schools, business schools. But this bill's focus is how we as a state and how we as a legislative body create an environment to keep those people in our state. And you bring up a good point about too many attorneys. Well, if they don't come to the General Assembly, they in essence have some difficulty in the marketplace because of the glut. But here's the reality. If somebody can make a living and they have roots in our state and have homes, the ability to be able to have some money set aside, maybe that lawyer looks at starting a new business. Maybe that lawyer, through their analysis of critical thinking and critical analysis, start and build up a manufacturing business or different aspects of business using their education. I want to keep them in the state and maybe work, as you said, aligning educational interests with the needs in the marketplace. You know, we have needs. You talk to custom manufacturing organizations in our state, they could probably hire 10 people the next day.
Yep.
But we don't have that alignment. But at the same time, if we train those people and they have a choice between North Carolina and their cost of living versus Connecticut, why wouldn't we use Learn Here, Live Here as a carrot to keep him and level the balance, level the playing field to keep our young people and not lose them? That's why this bill is so important. And that's why I believe we shouldn't get caught up in regards to schools and education. We've got the people coming into our state. We've got people that are taking advantage of our advanced manufacturing and retraining their skills. The fact of the matter is they are choosing to leave the state because they're not able to afford or keep their roots down. I want to keep them in the state, and this bill will do that.
Okay, I do too, and I just wanted to point out that we have more incoming people with bachelor's degrees than outgoing. I just wanted you to know that's what we found when we reviewed it. And also, you know, just because we're so short of money this year, I want to make sure that if we give any away in a tax credit, that it works. So that's why I'm asking all these questions, because we're in a, you know, it's a very tight budget this year. We better only invest in something that we really are sure works.
And I prefaced that in my earlier testimony, and I respect that greatly. And my focal point in that is, Jake, as an example, is hopefully he'll have a good 35, 40 years of working ahead of him. If we lose him from our state, we have lost a very valuable contributor and tax contributor in our state. And once they go, they don't come back. And I never want to lose that fight.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Hodig.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Hwang and Mr. Cahill, for coming to testify today. I was intrigued by Senator Fonfara's questions to you, Senator Hwang, about the downward pressure for marketability of our state institutions, not just public university institutions, but higher education facilities and institutions within Connecticut. And I was wondering if you thought that this bill might add to that marketability of those that would come to study in Connecticut and then choose to like it enough here to either go out and work and come back and then have the opportunity to purchase their first home.
Thank you, Representative Hoytek. I think it's a great question. I think when you look at some of the great institutions that we have in our state, the very upper echelons of elite institutions, you're going to draw students from throughout the country regardless. But what this bill possibly could do, create a positive residual effect to have out-of-state residents take a look at the great community college advanced manufacturing programs that we've initiated the last 3 years. We can look at the great technical schools that offer audiovisual and digital marketing opportunities that we have down in Stanford. We draw them from New York. You know what? You've added a different texture to this discussion, because it may be that we should leverage one of our strengths in our state, which is the incredible quality of education, and to use that as an additional measure to attract other people to come into our state. You know, I think we talk a lot about, you know, the out-migration, but as Representative Machinsky said, you know, why don't we build on that in-migration and bring more talented people to say, look, you can get your vocational technical, or you can get your community, you can get and go to, you know, UConn, Stanford, or all the other various schools beyond what we normally hear throughout the country. Come to our schools. Come to our border schools. Help the ones up in Enfield and Windsor, and help the ones up toward New London to be able to come, go to school here, and have an opportunity to have money that you make go toward your future purchase of a home. I mean, that's a great idea.
Well, I thank you for that. That's not why I asked the question, but I thank you for the compliment anyway. I would like to align some thoughts and some of the things that we've been doing the last several years with transit-oriented development and young urban professionals who want to live and work in a city and be able to transport themselves physically from one place to another, possibly not just renting an apartment, but buying an apartment or a condominium. And having worked in New Haven, or I still work in New Haven, and seeing people who graduate from the colleges in New Haven who love the city so much that they are trying to relocate in the city initially and then in the suburbs after, is one of the things that intrigues me about this legislation and why it's so positive to me. I also have personal experience with two daughters so far who have graduated from college. One went to a state university in Connecticut and lives in Connecticut. In fact, she happens to be a constituent of Joe A to Z's. And the other, whose college experience was in Massachusetts because the affordability of her education was less with grants and scholarships than it would have been at a small state college. So she is currently worked in Manhattan, works in Boston, and is not living in Connecticut. So those are the realities of what's happening right now. One's a teacher and one's in the marketplace. So I think if we really want to keep who we have, who we've educated, and we have a wonderful secondary education program in Connecticut, I think we really need to think about how we should align some of the programs that we're investing in as well and add this to it. Thank you, Senator.
And thank you, ma'am. And I will offer that I've taken Senator Fanfara's comments and thoughts and align with yours to know that there is a lot that we still need to do.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony, Senator. Thank you. If we could move back to the